A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, but early in the morning he arrived again in the temple area, and all the people started coming to him. He sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and made her stand in the middle. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. Now, in the law of Moses, commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" They said this to test him so that they could have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. But when they continued asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he bent down and wrote on the ground. And in response, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. So he was left alone with the woman before him. Then Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No one, sir." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Thomas Edison was not only a great scientist, but also a man of great vision and faith. He was a man who understood the vicissitudes of life and found a way to bring victory from what others might see as defeat. So one day in December 1914, 101 years ago already, some of you have heard of Thomas Edison. His laboratory, where all of his life's work had been, containing notes, equipment, and many contraptions that he had created and invented for many, many decades, all this caught fire and burned to the ground. The height of the fire, Edison's son, Charles, commented, "My heart ached for my father. Here he was, 67, no longer young, and the work of his life was going up before him in flames." The next morning, Edison surveyed the damage and said, "There's a great value in disaster. All our mistakes are burnt up. Thank God we can start anew." Pretty positive. 3 weeks after the fire, Edison delivered his first phonograph record player, a significant invention that literally sprang from the ashes of defeat. Even though Edison had lost his whole life's work, he had the inner strength and fortitude to see that good could come out of death. It's an experience I think all of us have in so many ways. Some of us may be losing a love, or some of us may be at the point of losing a job, or some of us even losing someone to death, or we having to face serious illness. Isaiah writes that for the Judeans who are in exile in Babylon due to the failure of following God's ways, that the Lord is going to restore them. And that's exactly what St. Paul talks about in that beautiful reading to the Philippians. He says, "I don't look back." Now, he would have had a lot of reasons to look back. Paul was very well known among Romans, and he was a zealot in the practice of his own faith. But when God converted him and he met Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus, his whole life changed. And he says today, I don't look backwards, I look ahead. And it's so important for us to be able to look ahead and not to look at what happened or what didn't happen in our lives. God has a perfect plan for us, if only we're willing to listen. So let me give you a few examples. A few years ago, there was a beautiful story about Pope John Paul II. And it's a story about a priest who's visiting Rome. He's on business. And on his visit to Rome, he goes by one of the major basilicas and notices a beggar there. But the beggar looks familiar to him. And so he goes up to him and he says, aren't you Paul Sullivan from Wisconsin? And the guy says, yeah. And he's got a beard and he looks dirty. And the guy says, Paul, we were in the seminary together. You and I were ordained priests together. Paul says, well, I left the priesthood and I drink. I've been doing drugs. And says, I don't even have a house anymore. I live on the streets of Rome. This guy had been very well educated. Had been teaching in a seminary in Rome, but lost it all to booze and drugs. So this priest is so overtaken by this that he's on business in Rome. He goes back to the Vatican and he tells one of his friends that he's working with. And the next day the friend comes up to me, he says, listen, he says, the Pope would like to have dinner with you. He says, what? He says, and not only he wants you to bring Paul Sullivan, a priest, with you. He says, oh, I can't do that. He goes, go find him and bring him to dinner. So a week later, here they are at the Pope's residence. They're having dinner. And of course, he told the guy, clean up, shave, and gave him a suit of clothes. So they're there. And during dinner, there's a lot of small talk. And finally, the Pope looks at the former priest. He says, listen, he says, would you pardon us? Tells the guy, the drunk, let's go to the other room. So they get there, and he says, I'd like you to hear my confession. And the guy said, well, I can't hear your confession. Holy Father, he says, I'm no longer a priest. He says, you're always a priest. Hear my confession. So the Pope kneels and he goes to confession to him. And afterwards, the former priest, who always is a priest, says, can you hear my confession? So they get back out. He says, I'm going to reassign you to a parish here in town where you can work with the poor and the destitute. St. Augustine says, misera and misericordia, misery and mercy. Misery meeting mercy. That's what today's gospel is about. Which one of us in this church hasn't screwed up at times, made mistakes? Which one of us in this church hasn't sinned? We all have. It's so easy for us to judge others. We haven't walked in their shoes. Who knows about this woman caught in adultery today? What kind of life she had been dealt? Who knows? And it was very easy for her to judge. We do that on Facebook all the time. Be careful what you say on Facebook about people. It can destroy people. We do it all the time. It isn't just in today's gospel. And so here's Jesus. Jesus doesn't define the woman by her sins. We often define people by their sins. Oh, he's an alcoholic. He's a bum. He's a drunkard. She's a whatever. We do that. I do it. We look at people and we immediately have something to say, not verbally in our minds. And what does Jesus do in today's gospel? He doesn't judge the woman by her sins. He looks into her heart. Because no one condemns you, no one, sir. Neither do I then. Go and sin no more. That's the good news. That's what the year of mercy is all about. This afternoon at 4 o'clock, we'll be celebrating a penance service at St. Michael's. If any of you want to come and unburden your sins, now's the time. Also, next Friday, I'll be here again before Mass to hear confessions at 5 o'clock. And then on Monday of Holy Week, both Father Marcel and I will be available in both churches to celebrate reconciliation. Don't be afraid to confess your sins. Don't hold on. Jesus is here. Mercy meeting misery. That's what it's all about. So life continually renews itself. That's the good news. We don't have to hold on to the past. Like Edison, we can see every opportunity, even when things fall apart in front of us. We can see them as opportunities for renewed growing. Isn't that what gospel living is about? Not about looking to what's behind, but looking to what's ahead. May these beautiful days that will lead us to Easter glory point the way to resurrection glory.